Welcome to Fridays at Noon. My name is Greg Geeson. I'm the manager of People Development, and today I'm joined by Rufina Hernandez, Interim Director of Equal Opportunity, and we're here to discuss Now What Do I Do? Bystander Response Training for Bias Incidents. Welcome,
Right.
Rufina.
Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me to come and talk with you about
You're
this
welcome.
important topic.
Well, and I also want to mention that we did another show together just for our listeners in case they forgot. They can look it up, which is called Tips for Interacting with People with Disabilities.
Correct.
Right? And that was a big hit on YouTube.
Yes, indeed.
So, yeah.
Right. Top 5,000 cell.
Yeah, it was. So back to today's topic, bystander response training. Why is this an important topic for us to talk about?
Well, interestingly enough, we've had a number of requests for individuals wanting to know how to best respond to a situation that they feel was very unfair, very problematic. And we actually have a bystander intervention training for sexual assault and sexual harassment, but we've never had any for the bias incident situation. And we're hoping that this training then gives faculty and staff some helpful tips on how to respond, how to recognize, how to respond, and then at the very least know where to refer people for support and assistance.
Yeah. So what are we talking about when we say bystander?
Okay, well, it's really simple. It's anyone who observes an incident that is occurring between usually a perpetrator, someone who is exhibiting some bias, and I'll go into more detail in a minute.
Right.
And they're in the observing state of sorts. So it's any one of us could be a bystander. If we're witnessing something that is happening.
Okay, so today we're talking about bias incidents particularly.
Right.
So what are some examples of bias behavior?
Okay, so a bias incident is usually defined as something that happens that's focused on a person or persons who are targeted because of their race, their gender, their age, disability, sexual orientation, national origin. It really is any one of those categories. And then an example of a bias incident would be someone who is showing some intimidating or threatening kind of behavior. So for example, bullying statements or behaviors, slurs or epithets that are being used, or offensive jokes. And sometimes that area is where we have the greatest difficulty knowing how to respond because people just dismiss it as, oh, well, they were just joking around. And we tend to dismiss those kind of situations because we don't want to appear to be overly sensitive, hypersensitive, or whatever. But sometimes those are the most hurtful because of the fact that no one responds.
Yeah. So I know we're going to kind of drill into this topic, but kind of as a general question, why do you think bystanders have such a hard time getting involved?
Well, there's lots of reasons, and all of them legitimate. Although we're hoping that with this training there will be less less situations where you don't know what to do. So many times people don't know how to respond. And that's really why we're doing this training, is to give people those skills. But there's also the safety concerns that someone is concerned about. If I get involved with this, I might be the subject of the physical or emotional outburst or something, and people want to feel safe, and therefore they don't get involved. They don't want to draw the attention then to themselves and be the subject of the perpetrator's behavior. There's also the real fact that people don't want to get involved because of the time it might take. I don't want to have to deal with this if there's any kind of police or whatever. I don't want to. I don't want to be inconvenienced, and so they don't. It also could be that, frankly, it triggers something that has happened to them, and it just raises that emotional response again for them, and so they want to avoid having that come back to them. So there's a number of reasons, and so we certainly can address some of them. I can't address all of them in this training, but hopefully we can deal with some of these.
And another aspect that you do address in the training and you're familiar with, which I want to give a little airtime to, is the concept called the biased effect.
Correct.
And I'm going to kind of
the
use
bystander
my notes.
effect.
The bystander effect. And it occurs when the presence of others discourages an individual from intervening in an emergency situation. And psychologists kind of identify two components of this. One is it's the perceived diffusion of responsibility. And basically what that means is onlookers are more likely to intervene if there are few or no witnesses there. The more people that are there, the more people will feel more absent or not as directly attached to the situation.
Distance themselves.
And the second one was social influence, where individuals in a group monitor the behavior of those around them in order to determine how to act.
Right.
And I'll give you kind of like a bad example. It's not a biased situation, but I noticed it a few days ago, and just how easily it is for the bystander effect to kick in. I'm walking by a Little League baseball game, and so I'm not part of it. I'm not in the stands.
So you're a bystander.
Yeah, and the perceived diffusion of responsibility, like I'm kind of even farther outside, and I notice a parent is yelling at the umpire to the point of probably saying some inappropriate things. And so that caught my attention. But because I wasn't in that space, that perceived diffusion of responsibility, I felt like it's their issue.
It's not my place.
But I was still paying attention to the dynamic. And then the second part, the social influence, I was watching all the other parents, like, is somebody going to... And nobody was saying or doing anything. And then the thought occurred to me, I don't have enough context of what was said before I got there or after, and maybe there's a reason why they're not saying anything, so I just continued to walk.
Right.
And that was so easy to do in that situation because I didn't feel like I knew enough or I was part of the group.
Correct.
And that's that bystander effect.
Right. And so the bystander effect actually hits three different areas. So conformity, watching what the peers are doing and then conforming to what they are doing. So if no one speaks up, that conformity is that no one will either, unless someone who's taken this training then develops the skill set to say, oh, there's something wrong, let me do something. So conformity. Ambiguity, which you described, which I don't know enough to really be able to intervene because I'm not sure what the situation is. So rather than perhaps risk that I'm wrong, I'm going to not say anything or do something. So that's ambiguity. Then the third one is obedience to authority. So, for example, if the person may not feel that they have the power to intervene, so I am just an administrative assistant, I'm not going to say anything because I am not in the position of authority to be able to say something. So if my boss is saying something inappropriate, I may have a problem saying anything about that because I don't want to risk that relationship, and I'm not in the power position. So there's a lot of dynamics that go with this in terms of whether people will respond or not.
Even in that baseball example, the thought occurred to me, doesn't the umpire, like I don't have a child, so I don't know what the rules are for parents, but can't the umpire say something or kick them out, or isn't there some official from the league that goes to all the games?
You would think so. You would think all of those might be at play. But there's a video that I was looking at that showed that they were creating a situation where a child is supposedly being kidnapped in a very busy street, in the sidewalk, and whether or not individuals would intervene in that kind of scenario. The child is by themselves. the person is yanking them, the child is saying, "You're not my father," help, help. And in that instance, no one was intervening, and it was that diffusion of responsibility.
Yeah.
They found out after talking to the individuals that they thought someone else would take the responsibility to say something or do something, but they themselves weren't going to take the time to do it. So it is interesting that when it's more people, it's less likely for some intervention, interestingly enough.
Well, and some of it's ignorance, right? Because people don't go through bystander training.
Right, nobody does typically.
the awareness, and all of a sudden, I don't know what to do.
Right.
But the more people would know what to do, the more they're inclined to act.
So hopefully we can affect the conformity issue by having some people speak up. And then actually what happens when they do, it then creates that momentum of others coming in and doing something.
Which leads us to the next question. So what can be done in those situations?
Right, and I mentioned the fact that we have that other training, the BOSS training, and some of our work here is based on that BOSS concept. So BOSS stands for be aware, so that's the B, be aware, observe your situation, so that's the O, and then size up your options, that's the S, and then speak up and act. So we do want to stress that personal safety is important, but you are able to do 3 things perhaps in whatever scenario. You have the opportunity perhaps, if you feel comfortable, if you feel safe, to do direct intervention. The direct intervention would be telling the perpetrator to stop. So in your baseball scenario, it might have been a parent saying, "Hey, back it off, that's inappropriate for you to be yelling at the umpire."
Right.
Even though the umpire has positional authority, still a parent coming in and saying that. Telling the perpetrator to stop, or talking to the victim. Let's say that you're observing this on the light rail, and there's someone that is yelling at an elderly woman, or telling a person that they perceive to be an immigrant to go home. Asking the victim, do you need any help? That starts to diffuse the situation because the perpetrator doesn't have a direct channel to the victim anymore. Now the victim is perhaps distracted to talk with you. And in fact, the direct intervention that's most effective is sitting next to the victim and talking directly to the victim. And that way the perpetrator isn't engaged now with the victim. So then enlisting others to help is another indirect intervention method. Asking others to either call for help, or asking them to sit with the victim and then you talk to the perpetrator. There's a lot of different scenarios where you can create a distraction that helps to interrupt or halt the situation that's occurring. You could even just ask for directions to the perpetrator. "Hey, could you help me find such and such," even though it's totally false that you need that. Or spilling a drink, or getting in between the 2 people. That may feel more direct, but it's actually indirect in that you could just stand there in between them. Again, that breaks the channel in between the perpetrator and the victim. The third option, which is the least direct but still very effective, is referral to a resource. So calling the police, calling campus safety, calling a supervisor, calling someone else that can help the situation. Last but not least, and very important, is supporting the victim. Asking them if there's anything that they need, if there's anything that you can do to help them. Because really, honestly, suffering alone can be the most devastating experience. It is bad enough that they're experiencing this from the perpetrator. But if they feel totally alone and no one is there to help them, I think that's even more difficult. That leaves very lasting scars, I think, that no one came to my aid. So, that's pretty bad.
And to kind of expound on what you talked about, because, knowing we were going to do this interview, I did some research too, and there's a lot of things on the web. And going back to the incident of somebody kind of addressing somebody on the bus or the light rail, that what kind of made me feel good was they were saying you don't even have to, it's like more of an indirect means, sit next to the victim and just have a superficial conversation about nothing.
Right.
Just that spatial change. And then it also makes the perpetrator all of a sudden the odd person out, because now this conversation is not even involving them.
Correct.
You don't even have to address what's going on,
Yeah.
address the perpetrator. It's purely just that deflection.
That would be the indirect intervention.
Yeah,
method.
in the moment is a
Right.
very powerful thing. So going back to the baseball thing, a parent could get back up, not address what the other parent's saying, and then have a different conversation with the ump at the same moment.
Although that would be unusual, and people would be like, it still would be very effective.
Yeah, because it would still deflect.
It would deflect.
All of that.
Right.
What if a bystander feels afraid or threatened? Like, what do they do?
Very important to recognize that your personal safety is extremely important. And so we don't want anyone to feel that they have to do something that is contrary to their physical safety. And I understand that. You don't want to jeopardize yourself either. You don't have to be the primary person to do something. You could ask others to help, deflect something, or call for the police or others to help. But you don't have to be the one to have to do that. You could ask, hey, if you go over there and I go over here, maybe we can distract the perpetrator or something. But if you don't feel safe, then, take care of your personal safety needs first.
Well, and kind of related to that is, on the news, a lot of what we see is a bystander won't directly get involved, but they'll take their phone out and videotape what's going on.
Right.
What are your thoughts about that?
It's really helpful, actually. That's a good action to do because of the fact that it helps to document the incident, first of all. And if nothing else, you can say, I am recording this. Now the perpetrator is on notice that there are witnesses to the event, and they can't just hide by their anonymity. This also helps the victim because they know now that someone else is witnessing this. This is getting documented. And you never know. The perpetrator might alter their actions. The victim certainly may feel more support because of the fact that it's being documented. And it might help later on in terms of any kind of prosecution. So I would certainly support that. Now, you don't want to, again, affect your personal safety. So you have to watch that. But I would certainly endorse people documenting it. And we're certainly getting some of those kind of cases in our office where we get the video of something happening, and it helps bolster the case certainly dramatically.
Is there anything like proactively that people could do?
Yeah, and I think starting now, be more aware of, for example, all of the emergency phones on our campus, where they're located near your buildings or as you go across the campus, because that's going to be a very useful tool for people to be able to get hold of the campus safety people right away. Also putting emergency numbers into your phone and having it, on a speed dial if you can. So, for example, everyone knows 911, but I don't know that everyone knows campus safety's emergency number is 3000. 1-3000. So, putting that on your phone. And then the non-emergency campus safety number is 871-2334. So those are always helpful. And sometimes people feel like, well, I don't know if it's an emergency, so I don't know about calling 911, but certainly the non-emergency numbers and reporting it, or you can also report online in our on campus using the Office of Equal Opportunity hotline reporting button, and that can be at any time after the incident, and then we look into that. If you're in a situation where you're in a location, let's say this is a bar or another more public kind of forum that you're not normally in, it's always wise to look at the location of exits and staircases, etc., just in the event that someone has to make a quick, getaway.
Yeah.
And so important to know how to leave quickly and get away from something that's troubling.
Now, you've kind of addressed this, but just to go over it again. So if an incident occurred here on campus, like what are the resources for both the victim and the bystander?
Right. So we've talked about campus safety already. And then there are others. And a large part of this training that we're doing, it's not just the skill building, but also knowing where to go. Lots of people have a concern about, I want to report it, but I don't know where to report it to. And so on our campus, what we would say is for support to the victim and to the perpetrator, Health and Counseling Center is available. So that's at 871-2205. Mm-hmm. And if the incident happens in the dorms, then Housing and Residential Education is at 871-2246. Mm-hmm. There is a Campus Safety Anonymous tip line. I don't think very many people know about that. And that's 871-3130.
Okay.
So all of these numbers should be in your phones if you don't already have them. And then you have our office, which is Office of Equal Opportunity, and we're at 871-7726. Now, there are many other resources that I haven't mentioned. If it is at DU, then those are the primary ones. I also have resources for off-campus that we'll talk about in a second.
Okay. And I imagine everybody talks to each other, so if they're not sure which of those numbers to call, it won't matter.
Yeah,
right?
just call one of them, and then the referrals start to occur after that.
Well, so at the beginning of the program, you kind of talked about this, but do we have a bystander intervention program, or are you creating it right now?
Well, we already had one available for sexual assault.
Right.
And I want to thank Amy Thiring, who is the coordinator for gender violence. She has provided us with the BOSS concept and that. But so the BOSS training is the one that Amy does.
Right.
I'm sorry, Andy. Did I say Amy?
Yeah.
Andy, I'm so sorry. And ours will be a training for bias incidents. So you see the difference. Yeah. They will concentrate more on that sexual assault, sexual harassment. We will concentrate on bias incidents.
Yeah. So that class or workshop or whatever it is will be up shortly.
Right.
It's also part of the Colorado 14ers.
Yes.
Is it ever okay for a bystander to not get involved?
Well, what I would say to that in response to that question is that I would like for people in our community, in the DU community, to understand that we all have to assume responsibility for supporting and upholding our community's values of respect and dignity for each and every one of our community members. So we want our faculty and staff to take some sort of action. It may not be the direct intervention. It may not be the indirect intervention, but it is very definitely at least reporting and ensuring that someone knows that this happened so that we can look into it and hopefully stop this from happening again, either by talking with the perpetrator or supporting the victim, etc. But some action of some sort needs to occur.
All right. Now, I know that bias incidents are confidential and all those kind of things, but can you give us some generic examples of what we're looking at or talking about?
Right. It is true that we can't disclose whether what matters come to our attention, and but I can tell you that a few fell into these three different categories. So we had some incidents regarding hate symbols.
Right.
Either in a classroom or off. Actually, there was one that was right near the campus on High Street and Race Street. So we had those kind of scenarios. Now, in both of those instances, we had no idea who actually committed the action, but we quickly, brought people together and tried to ensure that the groups that were targeted felt supported. So that was something that did happen. There was an incident that happened off campus, and again, it was very difficult to address for the victim because she didn't know the identity of the perpetrator. But she was coming. She is a person that has a head covering, and so the male coming out of the restaurant gestures to her with something that looks like a gun, and he did this,
Yeah.
And so that was very hurtful to her. She didn't know who he was. And so she was coming to us to say, is there anything that you can do to help me? And I gave her the following suggestion, was that immediately upon this happening, to go back into the restaurant and see if anyone else might have known who this person was. Perhaps the restaurant owner or service people might know him and get more information about his identity. Whether or not she could respond to a police officer or the anti-discrimination office would be much more of a challenge. This is where videoing comes in, perhaps, getting his identity with a photo. Might have been helpful, but people don't even expect it, so they don't have things at the ready. Yeah. Although now it seems like that younger generation is much more quick to get the photo and video, but that was one. And then there's definitely been this where we've had people on campus as they're crossing each other, so I'm just about to pass you, and I say to you, go back to where you came from. And that's very disturbing. In that instance, we had camera footage because it happened at Driscoll. The problem was that the person was so far away from the camera that we couldn't really get a good view of the identity. And so that was, but we tried. We tried to find out who that might have been. So that was a challenge. So we are utilizing technology to try and bring perpetrators in to deal with what has happened, but certainly supporting the victim is really important, even when you don't know who the perpetrator was. Taking some action is important.
Well, and I know we're starting to wrap this up. One additional thing I wanted to mention is, Ken Pinnock and I have been doing a conflict series.
Right.
And the 8 simple rules to managing conflict. And Rule 8 is called Empower the Third Side. And it's very much related to this. It has to do more with an intact group. But in a conflict, there's your side, there's my side, and then the third side are the people that are impacted by the conflict. And the concept is for the third side to rally and see that they have a responsibility, kind of like the bystander, to step up to the plate and kind of create rules and say that's not acceptable. And then all of a sudden you've got peer pressure. And it's really what we're talking about here as well. It's another angle of the same thing.
Yeah.
So based on what we've been talking about today, any resources that you particularly recommend?
Yes, so there's many resources out there, especially in the local, state, and federal arenas, and my presentation has a handout of all of those.
Okay.
I took a lot of time in researching where people could either register complaints or get assistance regarding any kind of bias incidents. So, for example, the Denver Anti-Discrimination Office, if something happens in Denver, the Colorado Civil Rights Division, if it happens in the state, and typically that it is happening, and then the U.S. Attorney's Office on hate crimes, just to name a few.
Yeah. And
so if people come to this training, then they'll get the handout, and hopefully it starts to increase awareness of where they can get some help and support.
And lastly, if people want to get a hold of you to get more information, what's the best way?
Sure, just an email, rufina.hernandez@tu.edu. Okay. You can also get on our website, the Office of Equal Opportunity, and we have the reporting button there, and it's also in Spanish and English, so we're very pleased about that. Or you can call me at 303-871-7726.
All right. And your workshop will be coming out in the next couple months or so?
Yes, around the start of the quarter of the new academic year.
Well, thank you once again for
You're
adding
welcome.
great content to our show.
You're welcome.
And everybody, thank you for watching, and we'll see you at our next Friday.